Is the playoff going to change for this season? Probably not much. We know that. It's 25, 26 and beyond. Is it possible we see tweaks in the seeding? Yes, but again, he says, David Hale, based on who he's spoken to, that he's dubious that we will even see that. Do you think that the seeding will be affected when they start the next round or the next, I guess you could say, contracted expansion, but not this year?
Yeah, not this year, because there's no reason, especially now given the news that the Big Ten and SEC are trying to steamroll this thing to AQs. There's no reason if I'm the Big 12 or the ACC to give that up, to give up the potential to have that first-round bye. There's nothing in it for them at all. Like I don't see why you would agree to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the seating's obviously going to change. I just don't know if it's as soon as next year or not, but that's a given that's going to change. I mean, the people who want it to change are the ones who get what they want every single time, so that's undoubtedly going to change. And I thought about this a lot last night. I mean, we look at things quite often from a Big 12 perspective because that's just sort of where we've always been, and that's where we are, and that's the folks that we've been along on the ride with for the last couple years. And so I was kicking this all around, and especially after listening to some of the arguments made by Pat and who else did we have on yesterday?
Dan Wetzel.
Dan Wetzel. You know, I was listening to some of that.
Ralph Russo
yesterday and kind of taking it in. And let me ask you this, all right? So the Big 12 is in a spot where if yesterday's news, which again is just floated out there, everybody reacts to it and they address it accordingly and they move on. It's like that's what I feel like when Ross dumps a big article.
Like
It's every time. It's always like a test balloon. So it's like he's got great stuff, but I also know what it's coming from. It's coming from the people who want it out there to like be fodder and to be talked about and to get a reaction to. And so it's a successful strategy because everybody always reacts hugely to Ross's big articles like that. All right, so the premise, if I'm remembering correctly yesterday, is that the playoff's going to expand most likely, right, to 14 or 16 teams, correct? Mm-hmm. I don't remember anything about the buys or any of that, but the gist of what we talked.
There's 16. There's no buys.
Okay, there'd be no buys.
There's only the top two. Yeah.
But in terms of like some of the details like that, we didn't really focus so much on that. It was mostly about the Big 12. Now, I do think the Big 12, rightfully so, because of its history, is paranoid.
Yep.
I also think there's an element of like there's too much of that sometimes, almost like. It becomes a weakness, I think, sometimes as well, of always feeling like you're fighting from underneath, and you are, but I just don't think it needs to be like the mindset constantly of woe is us. You know what I mean? And so people are built different. They look and react to things differently, so, you know, that's fine. But our big issue, or not even our big issue, but I guess like the big reaction was only 2 guaranteed spots for the Big 12 in this new setup, right? Mm-hmm. 4 for the ACC.
Yep.
4 for the Big 10.
No, 4 for the ACC. 2 for the ACC. Yeah.
So 2 guaranteed spots in the playoff if it's 14 or 16 if you're the Big 12, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So the last time you tried to call a bluff, when we talked about calling bluffs, what happened? They got pissed, and now here's their reaction to it. Mm-hmm. So if you're the Big 12 and we want Yormark to stand up and grab his shield and his sword and go to war for the league, or we want that out of the ACC, although they seem awfully distracted, is that worth the gamble? And that's kind of what we talked about yesterday is like you want a reaction, you want to stand your ground, but you also don't want to do something. They go, all right, you had your chance, and then they take your ball and they go home with it. So 2 guaranteed playoff spots. 2 opportunities for 2 teams, which would have been BYU this year or Iowa State or however that would have worked out alongside of Arizona State. Is it worth that gamble if you're Brett Yormark of saying, no, we're going to fight this. We're not going to agree to this, although I don't know how much you can really stop it to begin with, quite honestly. But is it worth risking those 2 guaranteed spots for the hopes of what? A euphoric sort of landscape where everybody just earns their way in, because we know that's not really the case. I mean, that's why we're talking about automatic qualifiers. But I just wonder from the Big 12 strategy or even the ACC, how much do you fight back on something? Like, you don't just sit there and take everything, But there are fights that aren't worth fighting because what if the alternative is much like the last time that you kind of said, you know what, we don't like that playoff. What was that, Bowlesby?
Yeah.
When they had the opportunity. And what are we talking about now? The fact that they had opportunity then, and then it narrowed down because they're like, all right, then, we offered this. So then yesterday, this gets floated out. This is clearly an avenue they want to go down. If this is the latest quote-unquote offer, how much do you want to gamble if you're Brett Yormark?
Well, he was at the game last night, and I just waved at him because he was walking with others, but I didn't get a chance to visit with him, which I hope we do by the end of the month. But I wanted to just get him off to the side, but I couldn't.
Because
I wish I could have.
The immediate reaction yesterday, of course, is like, 4 automatic qualifiers apiece, that's ridiculous, and this and that. But, at the same time, we do have to acknowledge facts. I think that's important, and the facts do state that the biggest brands are in those 2 leagues. The national champions of the last 20 years are in those 2 leagues. Like, all the signs when it comes to the top of the heap of college football point to those 2 leagues. That's fine. That's the reality of it, and that's not going to change anytime soon, barring some, magical run from, Clemson and Florida State, who are now happy. And, it's not realistic that's going to happen. So they're always going to be the 2 top dogs, but I just wonder if you got 2 guaranteed spots in hand every single year, which is more than you're guaranteed right now, as we saw last year with the 12 team, you only had 1 team in, and your second team didn't even get close to enough consideration for a spot. Are you really willing to gamble 2 guaranteed to put your foot down, and then maybe it becomes no guaranteed?
All right, let me ask you this. How good are you in math? I'm good at math. I'm not good at English, grammar, etc. Not good at all. 1 spot guaranteed among 12 teams is a 0.08% chance you're going to get a team in. You're going to get a team in, but it's like 1%, right? Or 8%, excuse me. When you get 2 among 14, it's 14%. It's a higher number.
Yeah, it's two teams with a shot to do something.
I think more the reaction was not that the Big 12 is going to get 2 and better like it. It's that I think that there's even, I get the feeling, based on just a few texts or whatever, David Hale also put this out there, that I think even some schools in the SEC, less than even the Big Ten, are into this automatic qualifier thing.
Why would that be?
I don't think because maybe they think they should have 6. I don't know.
But I thought it was somebody actually having a heart and going, you know what? Let's let everybody be merit based, and then it's like, no, they don't like 4 because they want 6.
All right, here's David Hale. As little as 2 weeks ago, most folks I talked to seemed to think auto bids was a pretty likely outcome. But over the last 48 hours, I've talked to a handful of ADs once pretty confident in the 4-4-2-2 model, who are now less so. Still possible, but as one AD called it, it's a long putt. In other words, the percentages go down the longer the putt is.
So who's that from?
This is from David Hale, who covers covers college football. Why?
What's up? We outside. Having fun doing what I want, cause you know the sun beating down kinda like a drum. Look how I do it. Look how I do it.
Another beautiful day out there, folks, so get out there, but don't forget your sunscreen, UV and
I just wanna have a good time. It's all on me, pleasure's mine. The weatherman said it's the right time, so we gon' get it jumping till the night time. We gon' get it. We gon' get it. We gon' get it. We gon' get it. We outside. Yeah, I might just take a dive with it, feel alive with it, ride with it, cause I'm fly with it. Loud with the trouble, loud with the bass. No clouds in the way, smile on my face. Look how I do it. Look at me, look at me, look at me splash. Look at me, look at me, look at me splash. Look at me, look at me, look at me splash. Look at me, look at me splash.
Public backlash, for one. The idea of an invitational, as Jim Phillips has called this plan, isn't well liked, as the folks like Ross Dellinger and college football Heather Dinich have reported the pressure from the SEC isn't as uniform as in the Big Ten, and he gets into that a little bit later on in this thread.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a actual, let's do what's best for everybody type of mentality, then that's unique and kind of refreshing. That's why I kind of am side-eyeing it, though, because it sounds unrealistic that that's the case because everybody is as selfish as imaginable.
Don't be so pessimistic, Craig.
I'm confused as why the SEC would want less, or not guaranteed.
Well, here's the thing. I've always and I've always kind of believed this about Greg Sankey is he's very good at playing both sides against the middle, and one of the things about it, and I've always said this, if you guarantee him 4, that may mean he doesn't get 6 because the 4 get in. But if you don't guarantee him 4, he could get 6 if you expand it. So
That's a good point. Yep.
you run the risk of that. So I think that, when I was in college, the government in Florida got rid of quota systems for hiring things because what they found was it actually lowered the diversity and this is a Republican-run government. Jeb Bush said it actually lowered your looking at all the applications because if you have to get so many of one thing, then you put everything in the pile, you get to 7,000, okay, 7,000 of this box, 7,000 of this box, 7,000 of this box, and then you get into this big stack of people who haven't hit the quotas yet, and then you start going in, and then you're just kind of not doing it. And if you just don't look at that, if you just admit people based on the merit, then it all evens out.
To me, should always be the case.
Yeah, exactly. So, but with the playoff, the same thing. If you tell the committee you have 4 of these, 2 of these, 2 of these, then how discerning are they going to be filling out the rest of it? That wonders to me.
Garrett, in 2021, when did LSU won it in 2020?
2020.
Okay. How many teams, based on if they went to 14, how many teams would the Big 12 have had in the college football bracket in 2021 based on how the season ended?
2020, 2 or 3?
5.
I would never have guessed that.
5. They would have had 5. Remember, Baylor ended up 5th in the country, made that run at the end. That's just 3 years ago. So that's one of the things of why the Big 12, 2 sounds great, but sometimes it could be 5. Now, again, is it earned or is it invitational? So you're giving me the evil eye. Yeah.
Now I'm just trying to figure out how 5 teams would have been in the college. I don't believe that's.
I'll go back and look
I don't
at that.
see how that's even. I mean, Oklahoma State and Baylor. Although you asked him about 2020 and then you said 2021. So
I was asking about what year was at LSU because I was trying to.
That's 2 different years.
2021 would have been, I believe it would have been Georgia. No, it doesn't matter. But 2021, the Big 12 would have had 5 teams with a really good chance of making the college football
that's different
playoff.
than being in the playoff. You're saying they would have 5 teams in the playoff. I'm like, how is that possible? That's not.
Look, that was only 4 years ago.
Right.
Yes.
See, that's the thing that they need to push back on is okay, you're saying this would have been that, but you also don't know what the discussions in the committee would have been because they didn't have those.
2021, Cincinnati finished 4th. Now they weren't Big 12. Baylor 5th, Oklahoma State 7th, Oklahoma was 10th, and Utah was 12th.
Yeah, I mean Cincinnati doesn't really count.
Nor
does Utah. But
but that they're looking at who they are now, just like the.
Well, then Oklahoma doesn't count.
But then Oklahoma doesn't.
Yeah,
count.
so I mean, I get what you're.
That's still a pretty good chunk that would have been where you think, man, we're going to barely get in with 2, but there are years in which it can be cyclical.
That's more like it would have been 3, and that would have probably been their best year. Look, I'm just. Of the opinion that you flesh it all out and you do what you think is best for your league if you're Brett Yormark. But I do think you don't just sit there and be and he's not a successful guy because he's some prisoner of the moment or some emotional reactor to things. And so yesterday I think there was a lot of emotional reaction to the seedings or to the automatic qualifiers, and I do think rather than be we've got to fight this, and that being the initial reaction, it's well, wait a second, and at least analyze it, and I think that's what they're doing right now. And so, I just sat there last night, and I was well, 2 guaranteed spots is pretty good, but I do understand the ability to get 3. I don't know how realistic getting 4 in is ever going to be. I find that really hard to believe, even with the example you gave, because that's more like 3, since 2 of those aren't even in the league.
They're not going to get 4 in if the other 2 have 8.
No, for sure not.
There's not going to be because they're just not.
Yeah.
There's no way.
So if you want to fight for the ability to get 4 in because you think that's actually doable, then by all means. But all I'm saying is you also have to take into account the last time you had an opportunity to kind of have everything under one roof and be all squared away and clean. you had a leader that's like, nah, and then it turned into you, I think, falling lower down the totem pole, and you lost ground, if anything. So that's in play once again here, potentially, of, okay, fight back against the automatic qualifiers. And I know you're not alone. I know the ACC is probably doing the same thing. But what do you risk if you do fight back on that and all of a sudden your 2 is 1, and that's your conference champion, basically?
You're 1/7 compared to right now 1/12. Yeah.
So that's what Brett Yormark gets paid big money for, and the presidents and the athletic directors and all them to figure out. And hey, I'm just throwing thoughts out there, not saying one approach is better than the other, but it's not as simple as just we're going to fight against this and they're going to have to listen to us. It's like, no, not really, not necessarily. I mean, you can call their bluff and assume that they aren't ready to call you back, but they might be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's the gamble you're taking, and that's what will be interesting is just the whole purpose of what we're talking about here. I don't know what you do in terms of how you politic this if you're certain leaders like Brett Yormark, but it is something, a presentation that when you do read through it, like I know most people outside the SEC and Big Ten don't care about the scheduling aspect of it, but when you do read Ross's article, like a lot of stuff gets answered this way. A lot of things would seemingly be a little bit cleaner potentially than they are right now. And you know, what do you risk in terms of you're still part of that Power 4 group that's seemingly trying to break off in its own way to legislate and do all these things? You know, how much is that still in your control if you then say, no, we're going to, and they go, all right, well, then you have less of a say than you had. But so, like, that's the gamble that you have to take, or that's the risk you run, you know?
That's why, you know, in the last 11 years, had there been a 14-team playoff, how many teams would have been in 7 or more of those 11 years?
What?
Because I think what we do, and I do, 8 or 9, because it's always the dudes. But some of those dudes
like
have been
3.
red high. It's a little bit more than that.
I mean, Alabama, again.
Ohio State.
Bro, what's most jerseys sold all time, most Hall of Famers, most high, like it's the same 5 teams.
Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, Penn State, and Oklahoma.
Okay.
And Oklahoma's fading. And then you have teams like Texas and others who are starting to kind of remake themselves.
But see, and that's where you have to fight back on the SEC numbers, because since the 4-team college football playoff, Alabama populates that mostly. You know, like that's their, like, hey, we're good, and then they always have a second team. But the other one rotates around, much like every other league. They just don't want to point that out to you. That, I mean, Alabama completely skews this number.
Ohio State is the most consistent
Yes.
big boy school and has been for years with a little bit of turbulence in and out.
Okay.
But Alabama, the run under Saban was stupid, and maybe we'll never see it again.
No, we won't. I don't think we will.
Yeah.
So, like, they have this gigantic mathematical outlier that is aiding their propaganda in Alabama.
It's not propaganda because it's actual evidence. But
No, but I mean, like, no, their propaganda isn't that they've won national titles. It's that because Alabama's won so many national titles, Vanderbilt is somehow better.
Oh, okay.
Like, that's what their propaganda is. So I think that if you're going to push, if there's a big enough court of public opinion in your favor to push back, that's really the only thing you can use. To Craig's point, like, how far do you push it and see that?
would you?
Would I? You know what? I probably would.
Right,
because I feel strong enough about the integrity of the playoff that I would really push it. And the one thing I would do that they don't do enough of, if I were Jim Phillips and Brett Yormark, I would be absolutely out there doing what Sankey does and going scorched earth on them for effing up the integrity of it.
You brought it up. Would you push the envelope?
I don't know. I just brought it up because I was thinking about it last night. I don't know what I'd do, and I don't have to make that decision. I think you have to be very careful, though, because we can sit here and, like, this isn't about the tournament in March. That's a separate thing. So let's just talk about what it is. It's about football. It's about football. It's all that matters is football. Not to say other sports don't matter before we get, like, the sensitive person you know, that takes that the wrong way, but it's about football. So, you know, you still have a whole other conversation to have about the basketball side of it, and you'll be much more represented in that conversation, along with more like-minded people like you. So I think you feel good about that one. On the football side of things, though, I don't know how strongly you feel about that, because the advantages all lie in two courts, and those two have a stranglehold on pretty much everything. So call their bluff if you feel like you've got the right hand, but I think you also do run the risk of whatever you do have as a power conference in terms of having a say in legislation or things of that nature. You might not have that on the other side. And let's face it, the 2025 playoffs is going to be what it is. After that, it's gloves off. They're going to be the ones running it, basically. Yeah. So you're going to sit there and call them and say, like, you're not going to do S to us. And then in 2026, it's like your champion will make it. And beyond that, like, you might not have anybody in here for all
we may not even include him or her. I have this, though. So the Big Ten and the SEC, this is not a poor, pitiful me scenario. This is, why would you not fight? Because of this reason. The SEC and the Big Ten already get more money than everybody else. The Big Ten gets more than the SEC, which sometimes it's overlooked, but they do. Now they're getting the majority and the larger piece of the pie when it comes to the expanded playoff, the one that right now is 12 and for next year will be 12. How can you, if you are the ACC or the Big 12 or anybody else, Notre Dame can handle this. How are you ever going to get on an even footing if you keep losing money every time money is given out?
Guys, I hate to break this to you, but it should be clear by now. You're never going to make that up.
I'm not asking. No, not make it up. You're never going to get to that. That's never going to happen. Never, unless you somehow, there's another in so many years changing of conferences. But you are falling further and further and further behind the curve. How can you compete head up, winning, if in fact you continue to give up more of the pie every time the pie is available?
Well, see, I don't really like thinking about this way, because then it becomes so dramatic and it becomes like this whole life or I understand that, but I just don't like to talk about it so dramatically and like life or death every day. I understand, though, the bigger picture concerns. It's just, what do you do? I just don't think it has to, be so ominous necessarily. Well, even though there's definitely reasons to be. I just let's let it get ominous before we have to get there. And I understand we had the conversation before that. You got to react now to it all, but I mean, life's not fair. The way to make up whatever you can make up is by going and winning, and that's why that Arizona State loss was such a stinger. That's why for some people BYU not getting in was a stinger. And when I say for some people, just in terms of if you thought that they should get in, they didn't get in. And if you're the Big 12 and you wanted to get a second team in, they get in. That's a bummer. There's others that maybe felt like, the committee got it right or whatever. But if you felt like there was a real shot to get a second team in and maybe a team that could go and win a game and you didn't get that, then that makes that Arizona State loss hurt that much worse, because that was your one shot and it was right there and you couldn't connect with it. And unfortunately, outside of connecting on those big at-bats, I don't know what you can do. There's not some magical network that's sitting there going, we're going to compete with the SEC. We're going to just, for no reason really, we're just going to dump globs and globs of money onto these conferences to put them to an even level. Like, that's not going to happen, okay? Yeah. So beyond winning, there's not really much you can do other than if you have well, I'd say, like, other than if you just have like a numerous mega donors, but even that's all that is pouring money into you trying to win. Like, they're not going to create a TV network that gives you suddenly a TV payout that's equal to or close to the league you're chasing. So I get it. You stand and fight, but the part about that is, and that's why I brought up this whole conversation. I didn't bring it up like there's an answer to it. I'm bringing it up because it's a conversation and people are going to have their different opinions on it. Stand and fight if you want to. But if you get your arm chopped off and all of a sudden you look around and you're rolling around with one arm because you decided to fight back rather than hold on to the two that you have, well, that was the risk you took, and now you've got one. You had two guaranteed, but now you just have one. So, maybe that's the way it works out. Or maybe you take your big swing and maybe you lop one of theirs off, and now you've got three. I don't know. That goes back to the root of the entire conversation is, what do you do? If you are Brett Yormark, for example, how much do you push back on what's guaranteed versus what you think you can ultimately get, knowing full well you're not really in control of this thing? And the only way to be in control of this thing is to have your teams go on some type of phenomenal run of winning when they're already at a huge disadvantage. And that's, going to be difficult to try and string enough winning together to be impactful enough to change anything that's going on right now. Because even the SEC's dominance, we're talking about something that's been built up over 20 years. Yep. Mm-hmm. And 10-plus national championships by 5 schools? Mm-hmm. That's not happening. Yeah. I hate to break it to you guys, but that's not happening. So, yeah, that's the quandary that you have if you're these commissioners.
What would the SEC have said? And this is kind of a little bit. What would they have said back in 1997 or 8 or 9 had they had this expansion, and they would have gotten 2 automatic qualifiers? Because back then, who ran college football?
The polls.
Yep.
So they wouldn't have said anything because they didn't have a say in anything.
But the Big 12, Big 8, Big 12, the ACC. Not really.
That's a great point, but the problem with that is you're talking about the 90s.
No,
We're
I'm just
in
saying,
2020s.
Yeah, I still think there's a point to be made about you're not going to ever have the money the Big Ten and the SEC have. That doesn't mean you just lie at it and you just deal with it.
No, but
But you're getting further. Like, for example, when they expand to 14 or 16 or whatever they end up doing, and you continue to get less year after year after year. Now what is 30, 40, 50 million?
But you're not
60, 80, 90 million.
But like we said, they're getting more out of this. So you want to if you want to fight for more than more.
I'm talking money.
Yeah, they
but
are
that's
still getting
playoff
more money.
spots.
Yeah,
Yeah,
playoff
If
spots.
they're getting 4, you're getting 2. You're losing 2 spots every year.
Yeah, but you're
exactly.
not going to ever close the money.
No, but you aren't going to close the money. But if you're going to increase and even incrementally close the gap so you can remain competitive, I don't think you can do that by rolling over. I don't. I think you have to fight.
Well, they've
as
already
hard as
done
you can.
that. They've already given up the money part of it.
So
Remember, that was part of the deal.
and that's part of this is in the ACC, Jim Phillips has his own problems, but he's not a guy. He's not a guy who's going to go out there and say, "Aren't we about the spirit of competition here? Look, let's expand to 16, but no automatic qualifiers. It's going to work out for you guys anyway." I'm not sitting here relying on Pitt and Syracuse to jump in line with Clemson, Miami, Florida State to help us get 4 teams every year. I'm not expecting that, but I'm also not going to just roll over and give spots to the SEC and the Big Ten they didn't earn.
Some of you are saying